Okay, the next section we're going to look at is, again, Chapter 9, Section 6. And here we're going to talk about, do a little review of memory. So we're going to look at um, the section Information Processing, Learning, and Problem Solving. Okay, so here in this stage are some key things that start to happen in this stage of cognitive ability. We start to develop selective attention. All right, we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Um, the capacity of our memory and the understanding of our memory, or the understanding of memory processes increases, and we start to develop the ability to solve problems. For example, finding the correct formula to solve a problem and apply it. All right, so first let's talk about selective attention. Now, selective attention is our ability to focus our attention on one thing and basically ignore distractions. Now, this advances steadily throughout this period. Um, Now, in pre-operational kids, the level before this, they are engaged in problem solving, and they tend to focus their attention on just one element of the problem at a time. And this is because they lack that ability, that conservation, where you can focus on two dimensions of a problem at the same time. Um, Concrete operational children, on the other hand, do have conservation. So they're able to look at multiple dimensions of a problem, like I said, at one time. So like we talked about before, with the whole volume kind of thing, if we look at the volume of something versus the size of the container it's put in, we're able to understand and focus on both dimensions at one time. Now, the other thing that starts to develop during this stage in life is our memory and our memory capacity, our memory processes. Now, if you remember from Psych 1, and we talked a little bit about this also earlier in this quarter, memory. And so remember that memory is a three-step process. We have what we first call sensory memory, and we have a kind of a diagram of that here and just a little bit of explanation. Now, sensory memory is the first thing we have, and sensory memory here in our example is memory for visual things. Now, remember, sensory memory involves the sensory register, also known as a sensory register, and so we have information about whatever stimuli we're getting from our senses in that sensory memory, in that sensory register. It leaves a trace. And so, but this only lasts a very, very short time before it starts to decay. So we have to be able to pay attention to that information in order to get that information to the next stage, which is short-term memory. So here what we're doing is we're focusing on that information. We're paying attention to whatever stimulus we're getting in the sensory register. Remember, it only lasts, again, for a very short period of time, about 30 seconds after that stimulus decays. All right, so we have to pay attention, and in this stage, after the sensory register, the working memory works on those memories. It helps us to move whatever we're getting from that sensory memory, from that sensory register, helps us move it then to long-term memory. So ways we can help do that is through what's called encoding. We can encode visual stimuli as sounds. For instance, we can if we look at someone's face and we try to remember that, we can talk to ourselves about the different aspects of their face. We can also rehearse sounds and repeat them out loud or repeat them mentally. So we can use that whole rehearsal mechanism to help promote long-term memory. Now, as part of memory in middle childhood, as far as organization, it is similar to adults. So organizing information and strategies for remembering are very similar to adults. The big difference is the quantity. We tend to start to be able to remember more as we move through adolescence. All right, finding the last stage of memory. So we have the sensory memory, we have the working memory, and now we have long-term memory. And this is where everything gets stored. It's like the warehouse of our memories. It can last days, years, or a lifetime, and the capacity for memory is pretty much limitless. Older children are more likely than younger children to use different strategies to get the memories out, like rote rehearsal, repetition to remember. And there's also, remember, elaborative strategy, which is where we link new information to information we already have. So again, remembering someone's name. You might try to remember the person because they remind you of someone you already know by that name. And that would be the idea of linking new material to already known material. When we're trying to, say, remember the colors in the rainbow, the colors in the spectrum, we already know the letters ROY, G, B, I, V. And so we're linking the letters of the colors, red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, violet, to just their first letters, which spell out Roy G. Biv. So we already have that material, and we're able to relate it. Another example is if you're learning music and you want to learn the order of the notes on the scale, we can relate it back to words we already know. Every good boy does fine. E, G, F, B, F. Or E, G, B, sorry, D, F. All right. Now, when it comes to organization of long-term memory, our knowledge of different concepts advances, so becomes greater. The long-term memory becomes more organized according to categories. Now, preschoolers tend to organize their memories by grouping objects that share the same function. We're more likely, though, as we get older, to organize information along categories. So it could be function, it could be color, it could be taste, it could be, things like mammals, it could be what are fruit, it could be whatever, not necessarily on function. Obviously, children are more likely to recall accurate information, and if they already have knowledge in a particular area, that increases their capacity to store and retrieve related information. So let's say your kid has a hobby, or is really into, I don't know, cars or trains or whatever the dolls are to have at the moment. They may be more likely to store and retrieve information about those things, about those hobbies, about those things that they're interested in, easier than they are to things that they don't really have a knowledge of as of yet. All right, when we talk about the development of the recall of our memory, it is a good overall indicator, memory is, of our cognitive ability. And it does get better as we age. Fourth graders are more likely to categorize and recall pictures than second graders. Why? Because they have a greater cognitive capacity. They have a greater understanding. They're able to process the information differently. And so our memory, the memory indicates that the memory of the fourth grader is better than the memory of the second grader, simply because they have greater cognitive function. All right, and lastly, one of the things that develops in this stage is pardon me, metacognition and meta memory. All right, and metacognition is the idea of the awareness of that we're aware of our cognitive abilities and that we're able to control them. So we're aware that we have problem-solving skills and we're able to use them. We're able to formulate problems. We're aware of the process of how we solve a problem. We're able then to activate those processes, and then we're able to actually focus on the problem and check the answer. So, for instance, math is a great example. We know how to, if someone says, divide 18 by 6, we know how to set up that problem. We know what the steps are. We know how to solve that problem. We know how to get the answer, focus, and the answer is 3, right? And then we're able to go back and check our answers and make sure they're right. That's the idea of metacognition. Not only being aware of our own cognitive abilities, but being able to use them. And then the other thing that develops during the stage is also metamemory. And this is just the knowledge and the function, knowledge of the function and the processes involved in storing and using memory and storing information. So we know, tricks and tips to help us store information more effectively. So for instance, we may have been taught at an early age how to use flashcards. We may have been taught how to highlight different things in notes we take in school. We may have been, if we're learning a sport, practice makes perfect. So we go out and toss a ball. If we're taking dance, we go out and rehearse the steps. So we know some of the strategies and tips and tricks that help us learn how to not only store those memories, but retrieve them as well. We become more aware of that, and that is meta memory.